unique radio show that teaches biblical truth for changing times. We do this through Q&A, timely interviews, dramatic readings from the life of Holocaust survivor Zvi Kalisher, and of course, Bible teaching.
To learn more, visit foiradio.org.
Join us for Friends of Israel Today, Sunday morning at 11:30 Central on American Family Radio.
There was zero movement from the Democrats. They sat there, stone cold, no smile, no applause. We've created 2.4 million jobs.
People are afraid.
The stock market has added more than $8 trillion in new wealth.
That's all we have is hope.
Unemployment claims are at a 45-year low.
Sometimes there's a rub.
African American and Hispanic unemployment have both reached the lowest levels ever recorded.
We are this mosh pit of society.
I don't like dirty cops. And the 7th floor of the FBI is full of them, and the upper echelon of the DOJ under Obama was full of dirty cops.
Seems like our patriotic duty would be to untangle the mess, find out what happened.
Let's find out what happened.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Hi, and welcome to this free-for-all Friday edition of Focal Point on American Family Radio as we come to the end of the week, as we make the long turn toward port aboard the USS Focal Point. Just a programming note, I'm going to shift the order around a little bit today. I want to get right to this memo stuff since that's what people are talking about, so we're going to lead off with that. I'm going to save the Bible study and prayer for the lead-off segment in the second hour, so stay tuned for that. We've got a couple of guests we need to work in, so we're trying to make the best use of our time and sequence. So we're going to start right in on the memo stuff, and then we'll get to the word and to prayer at the top of hour number 2. So you probably heard by now that the memo is out. I've got it in front of me here, and we want to work through some of this together. So we'll get us all up to speed at the content, what is in this memo. It's devastating for the Democrats. It's devastating for the left, because the bottom line here is it's an admission on the part of the FBI that they used unverified information, that they used what was a piece of political propaganda. They used what was campaign literature, opposition research that was funded by Hillary Clinton, funded by the Democratic National Party, and written by a guy that was totally biased, totally in the tank, who hated Donald Trump, and the people that worked with him despised Donald Trump. Let me give you the takeaway quote here from what, see if I can find the quote, from Christopher Steele. Now, Christopher Steele, remember, Christopher Steele is the guy that wrote this whole thing. This is his deal. He wrote this thing. He produced it, and he was paid good money, $160,000, something like that, by the DNC and by Hillary Clinton's campaign to produce this thing. It's opposition research. It got passed to the FBI. The FBI went to the FISA court to get a warrant to start surveillance on members of Donald Trump's campaign team, surveil people in Trump Tower. And this memo reveals that there was information that they concealed from the FISA court that was important for the FISA court to know before they decided whether or not to issue the warrant. And there's an admission here on the part of FBI personnel that there's no way in the world that they would have gotten that FISA warrant, that warrant to surveil Trump and his campaign team. There's no way in the world they would have gotten that warrant without omitting certain key details, without the slant that was placed in this memo. Wouldn't have happened without this Christopher Steele dossier. Couldn't have got it without it, and yet it is full of omissions. It is full of outright lies and errors. Now, this is where I want to get Christopher Steele on record. This is on page 3 of this 4-page memo produced by the House Intelligence Committee. And here's what Christopher Steele admitted in September of 2016, right about the time they are going in to get this FISA warrant to start surveilling Trump in Trump Tower. Here's what he said. He told this to Bruce Orr. Bruce Orr was on the committee that was producing this FISA warrant, part of the FBI team that was producing this FISA warrant. And here's what Christopher Steele said to Bruce Orr. He said, this is a quote, that he was desperate that Donald Trump not get elected and was passionate about him not being president. So clear, obvious bias here uses the word desperate and passionate. There was desperation. He was worried, this is September 16, he was worried that Donald Trump was going to be able to pull this out, and he was desperate that that not happen. You know, and they say desperate times call for desperate measures. Apparently, he's admitting, Christopher Steele, to Bruce Orr, look, I'd be willing to do about anything to make sure Donald Trump does not get elected to the White House. So there's clear evidence here of the bias on the part of Christopher Steele, recorded by Bruce Orr, who's part of the upper echelon of the FBI at this point, and it was made its way into the files, this record of his clear and obvious and evident bias on the part of Bruce Orr. This was in the FBI files, but ladies and gentlemen, this did not make it in to the FISA application. In other words, the judge who was being asked to issue a warrant based on the Steele dossier was not informed that this dossier was a piece of campaign propaganda that was authored by somebody who was desperate, in his own words, to keep Donald Trump out of the White House, and was passionate about that. He was driven to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. And the FISA court did not know anything about that. As far as the FISA court is concerned, this is apparently what we have. As far as the FISA court was concerned, this was a piece of intelligence developed by the FBI's investigative branch. And meanwhile, this guy's at the heart of this whole thing, this Christopher Steele. Remember, his dossier was the basis. Couldn't have got the FISA warrant without the Christopher Steele dossier. And he's on record here in FBI files as being desperate that Trump not get elected and passionate about keeping him out of the White House. This is information that obviously a FISA judge would need to know before he could make an intelligent decision about whether or not to issue a FISA warrant. And this information was not given to the FISA court. Now, Bruce Orr is the one that got this message from Christopher Steele. He's the one that put it in the FBI files. He recorded it, put it in the FBI files. During this same period of time, ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Orr's wife was employed by Fusion GPS. This is the outfit that hired Christopher Steele to go do this opposition research. She was working for them, working for the team that was hiring Christopher Steele to dig up this stuff on Trump. So she was being employed by Fusion to assist in the cultivation of opposition research on Donald Trump. Now, Orr later provided the FBI with all of his wife's opposition research, paid for by the DNC and by the Clinton campaign. And so the Orrs were both involved, hip deep in this. His wife is working assiduously with Christopher Steele to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. And the Orrs relationship, that is Bruce Orr, the husband, and the wife, their relationship with Steele, their relationship with Fusion GPS was concealed from the FISA court. So they issued this surveillance warrant and some extensions to this surveillance warrant without knowing of Christopher Steele's bias, without knowing of Bruce Orr's bias, without knowing that his wife was hip deep in the research. Back in two.
Attention all Christians who believe that America needs a spiritual revival, an awakening, a message of the gospel for our times. This is Alex McFarland encouraging you to attend the 2018 edition of Truth for a New Generation. This is a conference with the theme, Save a Nation. And on March 23-24 in Greensboro, North Carolina, you will hear an amazing lineup of speakers, including Josh McDowell, apologist J. Warner Wallace, Lauren Green and Todd Starnes from Fox News, attorney Abe Hamilton III of the American Family Association, music by the bands and orchestra from North Greenville University, and much, much more. Sessions for all ages, equipping you to share your faith confidently in any situation. Visit truthforanewgeneration.com. That's March 23-24, TNG 2018. You can find it at truthforanewgeneration.com.
Presented in part by the American Family Association.
And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Corner. According to CBS News, internal communications sent to FBI officials by FBI Director Christopher Wray, former Deputy Director Andrew McCabe's early departure is due to the results of an investigation conducted by the United States Office of the Inspector General. A report will soon be released by the Inspector General detailing this investigation. Pontification about McCabe simply wanting to use his sick time and vacation time for an early retirement was mistaken. With the FISA abuse scandal and this Inspector General investigation, expect to see more people go.
Visit the Hamilton Corner on the podcast page at afr.net for more from Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Hi, we're back. Focal Point, the program. American Family Radio Network is the network. I'm Brian Fisher, congenial, convivial, and amiable and effervescent, as always, host. Bombshell memo today, declassified by President Trump, released to the public, and it's as bad, if not worse, than everything we suspected. It was Andrew McCabe, the guy that just resigned in disgrace, because he concealed the fact that Anthony Weiner had a whole bunch of Hillary Clinton's classified emails on his laptop computer. This is the guy that was the sexual pervert that was sending pictures of himself to teenage girls. And he had on his laptop classified emails, apparently sent to him by Huma Abedin, who's his wife and was Hillary Clinton's aide. And he sat on that information until it was too late to do anything with it prior to the election. So he sat on that information long enough that it didn't come out, any part of it, until after the election was held, because he wanted to maximize Hillary Clinton's chances of winning. That same guy, that Andrew McCabe, was the one that testified before the Intelligence Committee in December of 2017, that's just several months ago, that they wouldn't have even sought a surveillance warrant from the FISA court unless they had the Steele dossier information. So this was central to this whole business. They wouldn't have even looked for one if they weren't basing it on this Steele dossier that was written by Christopher Steele, who was desperate that Donald Trump not get in to the White House. Now, nothing was redacted in this classified information. As far as we know, nothing has been changed. The corrections that were made were just typographical and grammatical in nature. So let's get to some other details in this memo. Got some sound bites I want to get to you before the bottom of the hour. Get back to the beginning of this memo. A lot of this had to do with surveillance of Carter Page, who was kind of a low-level Trump flunky, but they surveilled him and got him in trouble. He's pleaded guilty, I guess, to lying to the FBI. So, the reality is, with this information out on the table, there really is no longer a basis for the Mueller investigation. It just doesn't exist. It's not there. It's been so fatally compromised. You've got this doctrine in jurisprudence called the fruit of the poisoned tree. In other words, you get information, you get data, you get evidence that legally you are not entitled to have. Like if a cop searches your car, doesn't have a warrant to do it, doesn't have the legal right to go in there and search your car, and he comes up with weed, that evidence can't be used against you in a court of law, the fruit of the poison tree. The search was bad, so any of the evidence that's uncovered in the search is bad. And so the reality is this whole memo indicates from stem to stern that this whole surveillance business was bad. It was based on fabricated evidence. It wasn't based on anything solid, anything substantial. So the fruit of the poison tree, everything that's connected to this, anything that was dependent on this, anything that stemmed off of this, is now no longer valid. It's got to be pulled. It's got to be yanked. It's all got to be shut down. Now, these FISA warrants had to be reissued 3 times. And they were issued by people like James Comey. Andrew McCabe knew there would have been no warrant sought at all without this dossier. He was one of the ones that signed the applications on behalf for an extension of the surveillance when he knew it was faulty from Jump Street. And the Deputy Attorney General signed an extension, and Rod Rosenstein signed an extension on the surveillance, and they all knew that the information in this dossier was hinky. So this thing is just starting to leak a stench from every pore. You know, because the integrity of the FBI is really dependent on them being able to convince the public that they're above reproach. They have to be held to the highest possible standard, or people will lose confidence in the FBI. And this indicates that they have not been held to the highest standard, and therefore people are going to lose confidence in the FBI. It's unfortunate, but that is the nature of the case. Now, in the case of Carter Page, because of the letters of extension that were signed by Andrew McCabe, one was signed by Sally Yates, one was signed by Rod Rosenstein. In other words, they had 4 opportunities. James Comey signed one. Dana Bunt signed one. Sally Yates, who was the acting Deputy Attorney General, she signed one. Rod Rosenstein signed one. That meant there were 4 opportunities for the FBI to go to the FISA court and make sure they were aware of these relevant facts about the role of Christopher Steele's bias, about the role of Bruce Orr's wife in accumulating the information that was in the dossier, about the fact that Christopher Steele was paid $160,000 to do this in order to find dirt on Donald Trump. FISA court didn't know any of that information, but because of these letters of extension that had to be signed, that's 4 opportunities to set the record straight. And the initial application in October, none of the renewals disclose or reference the role of the DNC or the Clinton campaign in producing this dossier, despite the fact that the political origins of this dossier were known to senior DOJ and FBI officials. The initial FISA application doesn't name Glenn Simpson. It does not name Fusion GPS. It doesn't identify the fact that the research for the dossier was paid for by a law firm that represents the DNC. That's Perkins Coie, even though the DOJ knew that Fusion GPS was behind this and the DNC was behind it, they didn't let anybody know. And the FBI had separately authorized payments to Steele for some of the same information. That's not in the FISA application. Now, the Carter Page FISA application also cited extensively a September 23rd, 2016 Yahoo News article by Michael Isikoff, which focused on Carter Page's 2016 trip to Moscow, July 2016. Now, the article is cited in the FISA application as if it corroborated the information in the dossier. So they say, hey, look, we've got this information here, and it's corroborated by Michael Isikoff's piece on Yahoo News. The problem is that Michael Isikoff got all of his information from Steele, from Christopher Steele. So this is just a circular argument. He gives information to Michael Isikoff. Michael Isikoff puts it in an explosive piece on Yahoo News. FBI then cites that news story as corroboration for the dossier when they knew good and well that it came from exactly the same source. There's no corroboration there whatsoever. Now, Steele, you remember, was suspended and then was terminated as an FBI source because he was making unauthorized disclosures to the media of his relationship with the FBI in an October 30th, 2016 Mother Jones article. In other words, Christopher Steele's out there bragging about his relationship with the FBI, that he's working for the FBI. That's a big time no. That's when they terminated him. And he hadn't told them about his contact with Yahoo News. They did not know at that time that he was the source of all the information in Michael Isikoff's piece. That was in September, before they'd even submitted the application for the Page surveillance. So Steele concealed that from the FBI. He lied about all of that stuff. And his numerous encounters with the media violated the cardinal rule of source handling, which is maintaining confidentiality. So Steele, the FBI had already determined, was less than a reliable source for the FBI, but they're still using the Michael Isikoff piece. They're still using Carter Page as a source for the FISA warrant. Now, Steele maintained contact with the Department of Justice through Bruce Orr after he had been terminated. He's still talking to Bruce Orr, who's still in a position to feed information to the rest of the FBI. And that's when he told Bruce Orr, when Steele told Bruce Orr he was desperate to see Donald Trump not get elected. That's the time when Orr's wife was being employed by Fusion GPS, and all this, Orr's relationship with Christopher Steele, his wife's research on behalf of Fusion GPS, Steele's involvement with them, him being the source of the Michael Isikoff piece, all of that was concealed from the FISA court. Now, the assistant director of the FBI's counterintelligence division, Bill Priestap, he said corroboration of the Steele dossier was in its infancy, that's his word, infancy, when they submitted the initial surveillance application. In other words, the corroboration, there was no corroboration. It had not been corroborated, and the effort to corroborate it was in its infancy. They were just taking baby steps to try to corroborate the dossier. A source validation report conducted by an independent unit within the FBI after Steele was terminated said that his reporting was only minimally corroborated. So Bill Priestap says that it was in its infancy. The validation report from a source inside the FBI said it was only minimally corroborated. And remember, James Comey, January 17, he told Donald Trump that this dossier was salacious and unverified. At the same time, the FISA court is relying upon Steele's reporting and Steele's information to issue the FISA surveillance. So in other words, this thing is bad from stem to stern, ladies and gentlemen. When we come back, we're going to be talking with a guy who's heading to Cuba. Looking forward to talking to him. Opie Hurst, taking over the role in ministry to Cuba of a good friend of ours, and we'll talk about a little bit about that. We'll be back with him, and we'll have more on the explosive memo released today when we come back. Focal Point, American Family Radio. Brian Fisher, my name. Stay with us.
This is Dr. Richard Lamb, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. Earlier this week, the Senate voted 53 to 46 to ban most abortions in America after 20 weeks gestation. This was 7 votes short of the 60 votes needed to break a Democratic filibuster in the Senate. All but 2 Republicans voted for the ban, the exceptions being Senator Collins of Maine and Senator Murkowski of Alaska. 3 Democrats voted for the ban: Senator Manchin of West Virginia, Donnelly of Indiana, and Casey of Pennsylvania. Polls tell us that 63% of Americans want a ban on abortions after 20 weeks gestation. So the Senate is thwarting the will of the people once again. Only 7 countries in the world, including China and North Korea, allow abortion after 20 weeks gestation. And sadly, America, shamefully, is still on that list. Let me remind you that at 20 weeks gestation, the baby not only has a heartbeat, 24 days, brain waves, 6 weeks, but at 8.5 weeks, it has its own unique fingerprints, which will never change. At 10 weeks, the baby is sensitive to touch. The baby squints, swallows, furrows his or her brows, and frowns. Thumb sucking begins. 10 weeks after that, we were going to ban abortion, and the Democrats in the Senate said no. We are routinely killing these babies. It is a disgrace and an outrage. And if we do not stop this slaughter of the innocent, God's judgment will rightfully descend upon our nation. We must call our nation to repentance and pray for the great revival that will lead to the end of this child sacrifice, which is so repugnant to our Father God. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio. Listen to the audio podcast or download today's program at afr.net. You can also read Brian Fisher's columns at afa.net. afa.net.
Hi, and welcome back to this free-for-all Friday edition of Focal Point on the American Family Radio Talk Network. We get to open up the phones here. In the next segment, we'll take your calls, your reaction to the release of this memo. Love to know what you think about all that. Before we get to that, we have a special guest in our studio. Opie Hurst is with us. He's taken over a counseling ministry, stepped into a role. He was assisting Bob McCuistion in this. Bob's been on this program before. He's the one that started these mission trips to Cuba, which is primarily what I want to talk to Opie about. But tell us, Opie, just a little bit about your ministry, what you do, and where people will get more information about that.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for the opportunity to do this. I'm a biblical counselor, so mainly a nouthetic counseling type counselor. So I've been with Bob since 2010. We were really primarily the 2 counselors, and he passed away in a car wreck here a year ago this month. Cuba was his primary mission place. You know, since I think 1998. Mm-hmm. But the counseling ministry itself, is, we're on North Veterans Boulevard, and we don't charge. It's a nonprofit 501(c)(3), and it's a ministry run by faith.
Hmm. Well, I know when I would talk to Bob McCuistion about Cuba, man, I mean, his face would just light up. I mean, you talk about something that was a passion for him. Yeah, that was clearly it. And so here's an opportunity for you to sort of take the torch and kind of carry it forward in Cuba. So tell us, Opie, when you go to Cuba for this trip, what will you be doing there? Do you have open doors for ministry there in Cuba? It's a communist country. It still is a communist country. So when you go, what opportunities will you have to minister the good news of the gospel?
Well, I'll try to not tell you where the location is. I think that's probably wise. We will fly in. It's going to be 7 of us. Pastor David Ball from here.
Now, can you fly directly from the States to Cuba now?
You can.
Okay.
You
When
can.
I went to Cuba a number of years ago, we had to fly to Panama City.
Oh, no.
And then from Panama City to Cuba. But now I think the routes are direct. So anyway, keep going.
That's right. So we'll fly into Havana, and then from there we'll go to our location. And what we'll do is there's a retreat. This retreat's been going on, I believe, since 2009. And it's where we take university students. There's over 40, I was reading where there was over 40 universities in Cuba. So students will come, and they'll come for a retreat. Now, for students to come for a retreat, university students, they have no money. I mean, it's a communist country, and it's an average of probably $50 a year. A doctor makes $50 a year, and as well as a garbage truck, driver. So, but students have nothing. So, what happens is we meet with pastors there from that location. There are very few pastors there, but we'll meet with them, and this retreat will happen. What we'll do is raise support for scholarships for the university students, and they'll come, and they really have to sacrifice to get there. Some of them ride and drive, 14 hours in the back of a truck.
Now, these students that are coming to this retreat, do they know that it's going to be centered around Christ and the gospel, or do they just like the idea of getting away on a retreat?
Well, it's my understanding, this is my first trip. Okay, so David Ball went on the last trip, and the fruits that were the result of that trip, there were 88 university students that were saved. They know that they're coming to a Christian, biblically based retreat of teaching. So now, on a religious visa, that can be taught. That's legal. Information or taking information in, such as Bibles or a group of Bibles, is not legal. So,
well, I remember one of the guys in our group when we went in, he took some Bibles with him, and they confiscated him and detained him for confiscated the Bibles and detained him for some questions. So I know they're serious about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. But the exciting thing about this, Brian, is, I was reading this morning where Jesus says, hey, go make disciples unto all nations. And I begin to think, the results of the last trip that they went, and annually this is something that occurs. You have 88 students who come to know Christ, and the thought that, what's better than 88 leaders begin to lead a country that's coming out of communism is a great thing. But what's better than that is 88 born-again Christians, or a possibility of 600, 800.
Now, these college students, how this is your first trip, but based on what you heard from Bob and from David, who'd been there before, what sense do you get about their receptivity to spiritual things? I mean, communist countries don't even believe in God. What receptivity do they have?
Hungry. See, what they have, what they don't have there that we have is a lot of information coming in. They don't have the internet. It's very difficult to get, to have access to a lot of things that culturally we have here, and the different, types of religious thoughts of pluralism and postmodernism and the isms.
Well, I remember that was one of the shocks to our system. We were no internet. We were there for like 4 days, and no internet. I mean, you feel completely disconnected from the rest of the world.
Yeah, and that's my understanding as well. But one of the things is they've been at a university, which Castro, just been doing some reading on it, is, their mindset and what they've been taught is more of, like a religion, the revolution doctrination, so it went from a Catholicism thought to basically an atheist religion, during Castro's reign. And of course, they made some changes in the Constitution at one particular time, I think in the 90s, 1992, I believe, and went to just a state-run type of university. So, but they're hungry. And I have photos of their last visit there, and the preaching there is, like I said, biblical, just 100% inerrancy of Scripture. And you've got these students surrendering Christ. I mean, if you've been there, you know how kind of dead it is in a communist country, and how the feeling there, as you mentioned.
One of the amazing things to me is when we were in Havana, we were on the other side of the bay from Havana, and there's this big, giant statue. I don't know how tall it is, but it's, I don't know, 60 or 70 feet tall. It's a big, massive statue of Christ looking out over Havana with his arms extended. And I was looking at the plaque, and apparently that statue of Christ was dedicated like 2 days before Castro launched his revolution in whatever it was, 1957. So just got in under the wire, and apparently the communist regime has never gotten around to taking that statue down or out. It surprised me that it was still there, but there it was, big as life.
Yeah, wow, that is interesting. Yeah, the reason Bob got excited about it is not just because of Bob's love for the Cuban people, but, you know, when you're in an environment, you know when people, like Honduras or a place like that, you know when people are excited, the Holy Spirit's moving, and their hearts are moved just toward truth. You know, truth, God's truth is a powerful thing in an environment of a place that's been dead, where there's no hope, and it's covered with prayer. And these are pastors. I think Bob was, it was 3 days, and again, these students are traveling, so it's very difficult for them to get what would normally be in a car or an automobile, a 5 or 6 hour drive. They're 14 hours in the back of a big cargo truck, and it's 40. Bob said he saw 40 in the back of one, but they're there. But it only cost them $20 for lodging, for food, and transportation. $20 for 3 days, for the 3-day event. The issue and the problem is there's no money there. So what we do is raise the support here, and we take the money and give scholarships to these students.
Now, so their students will come to faith in this 3-day conference, this 3-day retreat. Then they'll go back to their colleges, to their campuses. Is there any mechanism for these students to receive some kind of follow-up on these college campuses, or is that a need that there exists in Cuba?
Yes, it's my understanding that's the pastor's responsibilities that are there. My understanding is very few missionaries there, but there are some pastors that are preaching the gospel within a church.
Now, what kind of risk do pastors run there of being detained? I remember one of the pastors I met there the Cuban government back in the day just went and rounded up everybody in their seminary, took them all off to prison, disappeared for like 2-3 years. I don't think things are quite as severe now. But what kind of risk does somebody who's openly sharing the gospel, teaching the Word of God, what kind of risk do they run?
The big thing's literature, is my understanding. They don't want open literature being passed around. A person can preach, or a person can teach within a church, okay? So that is a local ordained minister or pastor. The Protestant movement has, my understanding, has begun to grow some there. But most of there's not very many pastors there, but what you have is even someone from here, they have to have a religious visa to go in and has to be confined within a church, basically.
So they'll allow a certain amount of activity in the churches and kind of leave, as long as it's an approved church. I mean, some of the churches, denominations are approved by the government, and then others are house churches that are kind of flying under the radar, and they would be at a little more of a risk.
That's my understanding.
All right, my guest has been Opie Hurst. He's heading out to Cuba, communist country, on a trip to take the gospel to spiritually hungry college students. So, Opie, I want to pray for you and your team real quickly right now while we're together.
Can I ask you something real quick?
Yeah.
you know, what we're trying to do is raise $20 per student times 800 students, which is $16,000. You know, so we're trying to raise that support to be sent to 1634 North Veterans Boulevard. 1634
North Veterans, right here in Tupelo. 1634
North Veterans Boulevard, 38804.
8804 if you'd like to contribute to the cost of this mission trip. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Focal Point American Family Radio.
Women and men alike find themselves in despair after an abortion. Every woman who had an abortion was for a short time a mother, every man a father. But afterwards, they're all people in pain, anger, sadness, relationship problems. These often accompany an abortion. But there is hope. Call 866-482-LIFE. Your call is confidential, and you'll be talking with someone who has already been where you are and found the way out. 866-482-LIFE.
It's back. The seasonal favorite from American Family Coffee is here for Valentine's Day. Devotion, the popular chocolate raspberry flavored ground coffee, is available in a 12-ounce bag for your coffee lover for Valentine's. A mild coffee with a hint of fresh raspberries and sweet chocolate from American Family Coffee. Visit afastore.net or call 877-927-4917.
Isn't that a beautiful sound? That sonogram holds the sound of a baby's heartbeat. Hi, I'm Jim Stanley, General Manager for AFR. We're partnering with the Ministry of Preborn to help save babies' lives. Preborn partners with pregnancy centers throughout America in helping abortion-minded women choose life through ultrasound. By letting a mother hear her baby's heartbeat and see her baby in the womb, she will choose life 80% of the time. Ultrasound is a game changer. For $140, you can provide 5 ultrasounds. All gifts are tax deductible, and 100% of your gift goes to saving babies. You can save a baby's life right here in America by donating to Preborn. To donate, dial pound 250 and say keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. Or donate securely at preborn.com. That's preborn.com. Your love can save a life.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Number to call if you'd like to join our conversation. We typically call this open, our free-for-all Friday. Talk about anything you want. Today, I want calls directed to the revelation of this memo today. Some of the things we talked about. Want to get your thoughts on that. 888-589-8840 is the number. 888-589-8840. Before we get to those phone calls, I want to take an opportunity to pray for my guest, Opie Hurst, and he's got a team of 7 going to Cuba on a mission trip. Let's just pray for them as a listening audience. Father, we do lift up Opie and his team as they head toward Cuba. Lord, this is a darkened country, needs the light of the gospel, needs the work of the Holy Spirit. And Lord, you know that there are spiritually hungry college students in that land. We pray that you will supply the funds that are necessary to make it possible for these students to get away for this weekend retreat. I pray that your Spirit will hover about this team. Pray that you'll arrange divine encounters, that you will bring students to this retreat that are prepared to do business with you and are prepared to take back what they learn and share that on their college campuses and begin to plant little beacons of light in each one of these classrooms and each one of these campuses. So we pray that your Holy Spirit will go with them, that you will protect them from all harm and danger, and we pray that they would, by your grace and mercy and power, be able to bear much fruit for the kingdom. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, and one more time on the address, Opie, where they can send contributions to make this possible.
Yes, thank you. 1634 North Veterans Boulevard, Tupelo, Mississippi, 38804. And that's Faith Ministries.
Faith Ministries.
Faith Ministries. And just put Cuba in the memo.
Okay.
We're very thankful. The opportunity to get these students there. It could change that whole place.
Yeah,
really
you
could.
bet.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Opie. Appreciate it. God's best to you. All right, we want to take your calls. Rob, let's squeeze in a couple of sound bites before we start opening up the phone lines. Let's get Donald Trump's reaction. This is clip R4. Donald Trump responding this morning. I mean, he's read the memo. He declassified it, so he signed off on it. He knows just how reprehensible the content in this thing is. And here's what he had to say this morning.
I think it's a disgrace. What's going on in this country, I think it's a disgrace. The memo was sent to Congress. It was declassified. Congress will do whatever they're going to do. But I think it's a disgrace what's happening in our country. And when you look at that and you see that and so many other things, what's going on, a lot of people should be ashamed of themselves, and much worse than that. So I sent it over to Congress. They will do what they're going to do. Whatever they do is fine. It was declassified. And let's see what happens. But a lot of people should be ashamed. Thank you very much.
All right, Donald Trump, this thing is a total disgrace what's going on. And that's true in the FBI. I mean, that's so politically compromised. And this is at the top. Again, this is not saying anything about the street agents. We're not saying any kind of general assessment of the guys that get the job done day in and day out at the FBI. These are all people at the top of the pyramid, you know, and they say if fish rots first from the head, so you got rot at the top. If you don't deal with it, it's going to make its way down the spine of that organization. So we'll see what kind of steps are taken. Ron DeSantis, clip R5, Rob. Ron DeSantis, he's a congressman from Florida, has been very involved in his intelligence work. Here's what he had to say about this memo.
So it's a confluence of the Democratic Party, the Obama administration, Fusion GPS, the media. Shockingly, they used that Yahoo News article from September of 2016 as corroboration for the Steele dossier, but that article was based off Christopher Steele leaking to the reporter. So it's a circular logic that they're using there. So I think that there's a lot of concerns about this, and I think it's going to raise questions about, okay, why was the surveillance re-upped going forward? That stretched all the way into Trump's administration with Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. I also look at that Papadopoulos nugget that had been reported. It seemed odd to me, but the fact that that is verified. You have this anti-Trump FBI agent, Peter Strzok, who wanted an insurance policy, didn't want him to be president. And he opens up a massive federal investigation based off Papadopoulos drinking at a bar and saying that the Russians have dirt on Hillary Clinton. That is a very thin reason to start a major investigation.
You know, you have to ask a question about Rod Rosenstein. That's where my question is. You know, McCabe's been cashiered because he was a bad actor. Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, they've been outed. They're bad actors. Andrew McCabe is gone. He's a bad actor. The question now is about James Comey's gone. He was a bad actor. Question now is, what about Rod Rosenstein? This is the guy that appointed Mueller, and it looks to me like his hands are dirty in this deal. He was one of the ones that signed on an extension to this FISA surveillance warrant when he knew that it was fatally compromised. Rosenstein had to know that. If he didn't, then the question is, why didn't he know that stuff? Because a lot of other people in the FBI did. This is R6. This is Ron DeSantis' second clip talking about Russia.
I think what this shows is this whole Russia stuff was, I think, much more wishful thinking on the part of FBI agents like Peter Strzok, who didn't like Trump, the anti-Trump media, who obviously didn't like him, and of course the Democrats who were running a campaign against him. And it just seems to me that they always thought the worst about any piece of information they would get, and they took aggressive investigative steps, the likes of which they certainly did not take when they were investigating Hillary Clinton. So I think the reason why a lot of the press has been opposed to releasing this memo, because I think they're so invested in this collusion narrative, and it just bears repeating, Harris. I mean, here we are, we're in 2018 now, and we still don't have evidence of any Trump-Russia campaign collusion.
So Ron DeSantis saying, look, it was just mythical. They were chasing a phantom with this Russia investigation. It was made up. It was fabricated. And that's why they work so hard to keep this under wraps. Remember, we talked about this yesterday. There's got to be a reason they're working so hard to try to keep this from coming to light. There's got to be something in there, we said yesterday, that makes the FBI look bad. And that's why they're trying to keep this thing under wraps. We found out today exactly what it was they were trying to conceal, and it's not a pretty picture. Now, here's what Ron DeSantis said about Rod Rosenstein, clip R7.
I think Rosenstein's going to have to come to the Congress and explain his role in extending it. I mean, did he go back and review it and he was satisfied, or did he just extend it? And is he going to be able to justify this as a proper use of FISA? It's a very important question that needs answering.
Well, you know, so that's the question. Is Rod Rosenstein a bad actor? I mean, he's going to have a pretty good story for Congress for them to let him off the hook and for people to say, look, this guy's got to go. And remember, this is the guy that appointed Mueller. So this taints Mueller's appointment. Because what's Rosenstein trying to do? He's party to this thing where they're trying to get Trump in trouble based on this dossier written by somebody that hates Trump's guts, is desperate to see him not elected. Rosenstein knows this. This information is in the FBI files. He signs off on the extension for the warrant anyway. So how does that affect his appointment of Mueller? Does he appoint Mueller because he thinks Mueller is somebody that doesn't like Trump and will go after him as hard as the people in this investigation were? So anyway, nothing to the Russian investigation. It's all smoke and it's all mirrors. Well, let's go to the phones. Let us start with Mike in Cordell, Georgia. Mike, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hi, how you doing? I'm a first-time caller. Something I haven't heard anybody speak to. I know the memo just was released, but it's actually a two-part question. Since the evidence for the FISA warrant was false and everything, and that's what we know, now isn't the convictions or the persecution of Manafort and Flynn now obsolete? And what about? And the second part is, what about the judges that did convict Mike Flynn? Now, can they go back and pull that conviction because of that? Because the fruit from the investigation is tainted.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good question. I will guarantee you that Mike Flynn, I will guarantee you Paul Manafort, I will guarantee you that Carter Page, you know, Manafort and Page pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. Well, the FBI lied to them. The FBI lied about them. The FBI lied to the FISA court. So what about that? So I think their attorneys are going to definitely be looking at making some kind of an appearance in court, have something done with these convictions and plea deals, because those guys got the short end of the stick from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. All right, good call, Mike. I appreciate it. Let's go to Tara Lisa in Little Rock, Arkansas. Tara Lisa, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hi. I just wanted to be sure that you remind people that the Russia investigation didn't bring anything, even though they did all this. Everybody keeps forgetting that, unless it did, and maybe I'm wrong, that it didn't even show anything, because I get so much criticism saying, well, look at them, they did this. But also that we be careful of the criticism. It's like we're too proud of the criticism and the name calling, because we have to be slow about that too.
All right, Tara Lisa, I appreciate that. You know, and she's reminding us that the investigation into Russia, I mean, 1.5 years now, going on 2 years they've been looking into Russia, and still nothing, absolutely nothing. There just isn't anything there. All right, let's go to Steve in Dallas, Texas. Steve, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, Brian. Love the show, man.
Thank you.
I think that Jeff Sessions should make some indictments ASAP, and if he doesn't, maybe they ought to take him out there and put Trey Gowdy in.
Yeah. Well, Trey Gowdy's available. He's looking for work. All right, Steve, listen, I appreciate that. And, you know, I think there's got to be some serious house cleaning indictments. I don't know about that. I think a minimum, these people have got to be cashiered. They've got to be gone. You just can't afford to have these people sticking around in the FBI. All right, last call of the hour. Let's go to Jerry Reese in Wichita. I'll take your call right after the news if you'll hang on there. Jerry, Leonard, Texas. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Okay, first off, I appreciate your show. I figure you're the best news I get.
Thank you, sir.
And I'm just a peon, my one vote. But from what I hear, is I wonder why is Congress not policing the out-of-control judges, and will they do anything about the Hillary Clinton bunch?
Yeah. Well, you know, that's a whole other can of worms, because the same group that tried to get Trump in trouble whitewashed Hillary Clinton. So there's still some remedial work that needs to be done with that Hillary Clinton investigation. All right, Jerry, listen, I appreciate the call. And, you know, we're going to want to find out what these FISA judges knew, because apparently in the surveillance request, all this information we're talking about was concealed for them. So the FBI lied to the FISA judges. That can't be sitting well with them. Be back after the news.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Would you like to know how you can help the American Family Association celebrate our 40th anniversary? It's simple. All you have to do is purchase your very own In God We Trust poster. You can frame and display it in your home, office, classroom, or get permission to hang it in a public building. Help us remind America of our national motto. Order yours today at afastore.net. That's afastore.net.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio, a ministry of the American Family Association.
For American Family News on the Hour, I'm Chris Woodward. A controversial memo claims possible misconduct in government surveillance on the Trump campaign. Fox's John Decker has more from the White House.
President Trump reacting in the Oval Office to a Republican-authored memo from the House Intelligence Committee that, according to the chairman of the Intel Committee, shows FBI abuse of surveillance tools and an anti-Trump bias within the agency.
I think it's terrible. You want to know the truth? I think it's a disgrace. What's going on in this country, I think it's a disgrace. The memo was sent to Congress. It was declassified. Congress will do whatever they're going to do.
Excerpts of the memo obtained by Fox News purportedly show that the FBI and the Department of Justice would not have secured a surveillance warrant against a Trump campaign advisor without relying on information from a questionable Trump dossier. At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
Constitutional attorney Matt Barber says it cannot be overstated how devastating this memo is to special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation.
Since, as this memo establishes, the entire FISA warrant that led to the appointment of Robert Mueller as an independent counsel to investigate alleged Russian collusion, since that was based on criminally fraudulent means, according to this memo and the accompanying evidence that supports this memo, it would essentially indicate that the Mueller investigation is dead in the water.
Barber believes that some high-level officials from the Obama administration are going to face prosecution. Meanwhile, Democrats have expressed outrage over the release of the memo. A ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee says Representative Nunes edited the GOP memo before passing it along to the White House. According to Democrats, these omissions contain key pieces of information and that releasing it to the American public will compromise the Russia investigation. The GOP, however, says the only changes made were grammatical issues with the text. You can read more about the memo and find the memo itself at onenewsnow.com. In other news this hour, Oregon's U.S. Attorney is holding a marijuana summit because there's too much pot in the state that legalized the drug in 2014. Fox's Jessica Rosenthal has details.
Oregon U.S. Attorney Billy Williams says the oversupply of marijuana in the state attracts criminals, cartels, and increases money laundering and drug-related violence. The summit today is meant to hear from state leaders and law enforcement. In an op-ed published in the Oregonian last month, Williams writes postal agents in 2017 seized 2,600 pounds of marijuana in outbound parcels. He compares that to Colorado, where over a 4-year period, agents seized just under 1,000 pounds of marijuana. He says he has concerns about how the state of Oregon is regulating pot. His op-ed was published just days after U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions rescinded an Obama-era policy to not interfere with states that have legalized marijuana. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
The famed makeshift tent village outside of Duke University's basketball arena has been shut down by the flu. Fox's Matt Napolitano has that story.
Yashevskyville will be a ghost town for a while. Officials at Duke announcing Thursday that students in the famed shantytown that await tickets for the annual rivalry game against UNC at Cameron Indoor Stadium received an indefinite grace period to leave and return to their dorms. This as part of what the school is calling a cautious approach to the flu season. It's a tradition for students to create Yashevskyville to claim the best seats for the North Carolina game on March 3rd. Unless a grace period has been announced, students must be present in the tents both day and night. Matt Napolitano, Fox News.
In other headlines this hour, a judge says there is no way she'll punish the father of 3 victims after he tried to attack former sports doctor Larry Nassar in a Michigan courtroom. Former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty has scheduled a meeting with his inner circle as he nears a decision on whether to run for governor again. and U.S. employers added a robust 200,000 jobs in January. Wages rose at the fastest pace in more than 8 years. And that's all our time for this hour. Find more news at onenewsnow.com.
Exposing Washington with Walker Wildman.
So who is responsible for the dysfunction in Washington? That's what we're going to be discussing today.
We have become one of the most litigious societies on the planet.
The goal of this show is to bring clarity to the news coming out of Washington, D.C., and to expose the deception that has plagued our nation's capital for decades.
Exposing Washington.
Each Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Central.
On American Family Radio.
There was zero movement from the Democrats. They sat there, stone cold, no smile, no applause. We've created 2.4 million jobs.
People are afraid.
The stock market has added more than $8 trillion in new wealth.
That's all we have is hope.
Unemployment claims are at a 45-year low.
Sometimes there's a rub.
African American and Hispanic unemployment have both reached the lowest levels ever recorded.
We are this mosh pit of society.
I don't like dirty cops. And the 7th floor of the FBI is full of them, and the upper echelon of the DOJ under Obama was full of dirty cops.
Seems like our patriotic duty would be to untangle the mess, find out what happened.
Let's find out what happened.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged. An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Hi, and welcome back to the second hour of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Take one call from Reese in Wichita, Kansas. Reese, thank you for calling. Thanks for listening. And thanks for being patient and hanging on through the news break. What's on your mind today?
Well, I'm very grateful that they were able to put the memo out. That's what I wanted. But as I was sitting there listening to the news, I do have a question for you, Brian. I was wondering, how come President Trump put Rosenstein, isn't that his name, in? Why did he not know not to put that guy in?
Well, and I don't know, Reese. That's a good question. He might have had very little reason to suspect Rosenstein. I frankly suspect anybody that's a holdover from the Obama era. I expect anybody that's been involved in the Obama administration in any way. And my understanding is Rosenstein was involved in the Department of Justice back under Obama. I wouldn't trust anybody that's coming out of that environment. But I think Rosenstein is probably a card-carrying Republican, but he may be one of those guys that will fool you. You think he's with you, think he shares your values, and it turns out he's been working for the other side all the time. So I don't know. It's a good question, Reese. I think somebody didn't do their homework in advising Donald Trump on Rod Rosenstein, because he obviously is not going to be in position to do all that research and background checking his own self. All right, welcome back to the second hour of Focal Point. I want to take just a minute in this segment and spend some time in the scriptures before we get back to content. We'll get back to some more of this memo, some more sound bites. We are in Ephesians chapter 4 today in our reading. The schedule can be found at pray.afa.net. And I want to pick out just one part of the passage for today and talk about that for just a couple of minutes. And what this passage suggests or instructs us is that we need to keep short accounts with God and with each other, and we need to be people who practice the art of forgiveness. Here's what the apostle says in Ephesians 4:26. He says, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil." So he says, look, it is possible to be angry and yet not sin. Anger is a normal human reaction to certain things, and we want to be sure that we're angry at the right things and not angry at the wrong things. But Christ was capable of anger, so not all anger is bad. There truly can be a righteous anger. But what Paul says, it's important that when you get angry, don't sin. That is, if you are angry, be sure that it's for a justified reason. Because not all anger is sin. Now, some Christians believe that you get angry at all, that's just a sin, no question about it, but that's not true. Because Paul says you can be angry, that's okay, but don't sin in your anger. And one of the ways that we sin in our anger, Paul says, is if we let the sun go down while we are angry. We'll let the sun go down on our anger. So he says, look, anger is something that you got to deal with. Now, it may be justified, but you need to deal with your anger by the end of the day so that thing doesn't fester down in there. So you need to deal with your anger by the end of the day and do not give an opportunity to the devil. In other words, if we don't deal with our anger by the end of the day, we are going to give the devil a foothold. Literally give him a place. Give him a beachhead in our lives. You know, people ask the question, what can demons do to saints? Well, here's one way where we can give place to the devil. Do not give the devil a place. Paul says you can do it if you hang on to your anger, you don't deal with it before the sun goes down. Well, how do we deal with our anger before the sun goes down? Well, I think the way we do it is we make the choice to forgive people that have made us angry. And I would submit that anger is a sign that you've got somebody you need to forgive. I mean, the anger may be justified. I'm not saying that. But by the end of the day, you need to get alone with God and make the deliberate choice to forgive them for their sin against you. Because if you don't, then that anger will start to fester down inside our spirit. It'll start to poison our spirit. Remember, the writer of Hebrews talks about a root of bitterness that grows up and defiles many. How does that root of bitterness get planted and started? It gets started when we get angry and we allow that anger to turn into bitterness rather than cleansing it from our hearts. And the way we do that is by choosing to forgive people for whatever it is they've done that's made us angry. And now forgiveness is a choice. It's not a feeling. Don't let people tell you, say, well, I just don't feel like forgiving, or I'm not ready to forgive yet, or I can't forgive. No, the reality is forgiveness is always a choice. It's a matter of the will, and you can forgive people without feeling forgiving feelings because it's a matter of choice. So what we do, somebody sins against us, somebody makes us angry, we go before God sometime before the sun goes down, before we go to sleep at night, that night, we go before God and we say, look, Lord, I'm really furious with person X, and I'm angry with them because of what they did to me, because of what they said to me, and be sure you include how it made you feel. Because, Lord, it made me feel really small. It made me feel really worthless. It made me feel insignificant, and it made me angry. So you bring before God the emotional impact that their actions or their words had on you, and then you say, but God, I choose to forgive them for that sin against me, and I choose to release them from the debt that they owe me. When somebody sins against us, they are in our debt. They owe us something that they didn't give us. They owed us a certain kind of behavior, certain kind of respect, a certain amount of kindness, and they didn't give it to us. That means they're in our debt. And what we do is we go before God and say, God, I know that that person owes me something that they didn't give me, and I'm going to choose to release them from that debt. I'm not going to insist that they apologize to me for what they did. I'm not going to insist that they recognize what they did and come back in repentance. Now, that's what we should do when we do that to somebody else. We know we've made them angry. We know that they have something against us. Then it's our responsibility to go and make things right. But not everybody understands that. The people that wound us, they may not know anything about making things right, may not know anything about repentance or forgiveness. So that's something we need to do to release them from the debt that they owe us. And when you do that, you'll find in time that the anger will dissipate. And I've told this story before. Sometimes when I'd be upset with Debbie, and I'd go to bed, and I'd be running pretty hot, and she'd be angry with me. We're both running pretty hot. And God would remind me before I would go to sleep, Brian, you need to forgive Debbie. And so I'd just kind of roll over, and I would whisper a quiet prayer. God, it really upset me when Debbie did this, but I choose to forgive her and not to hold that against her, and I release her into your care. And then I'd wake up the next morning, and that cloud of anger and bitterness was gone, dissipated with the morning sun. Back in 2.
Here's Twyla Brace, president of CCHF, with today's Health Freedom Minute.
Apple has added medical records to the iPhone. Medical records will be viewable through the Health app. But there are 2 caveats to this proclamation. It won't actually be a medical record. It'll be a more limited set of data, often called a personal health record, or PHR. The data will be similar to what is found in a clinic's patient portal, such as vital signs, procedures, medications, and test results. Updates as new information is added to the records, and any patient-generated data available in the Health app. It will be encrypted and password protected. 12 hospitals and clinics, as well as 2 electronic health record companies, joined with iPhone to create the Health Records feature.
Learn more about protecting your healthcare choices. Sign up for the CCHF Weekly e-News Update at cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
For centuries, the Bible has inspired humanity and shaped the very world we live in. But how do we know this book is the Word of God and not merely the words of men?
What we believe about the Bible is based on what we believe about its source.
The God Who Speaks explores the evidence of the Bible's inspiration and authority through some of the world's most respected biblical scholars.
We have essentially a dual authorship. So it's true to say that Paul wrote Romans. It's equally true to say that God wrote Romans.
He says, we saw this, and that sets the Bible apart from almost everything else in the ancient world and its religious pantheon of gods and goddesses.
The God Who Speaks is a feature-length documentary from the American Family Association, available now at thegodwhospeaks.org.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Hi, and welcome back to the second hour of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Just got word, by the way, that the 15-week abortion ban in the Mississippi State Legislature passed the House overwhelmingly, 79-30. Remember, this is a pro-life bill that's designed to launch an assault on Roe v. Wade. The idea here, there are states that have 20-week bans on abortion. None of those 20-week bans have been challenged in court because the abortion industry is desperately afraid that they're going to lose those challenges, so they don't even take them on. Now, here's something that moves the benchmark back to 15 weeks, and the idea is that perhaps this will provoke a challenge to this law. The appeal will make its way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will have an opportunity to revisit Roe v. Wade. The first step has been taken, passed by the Mississippi House of Representatives today, 79-30. Well, it's Friday and time to welcome back to our Decision Maker line a frequent guest on this program and a good friend of this program, Dan Gainor, Vice President for Business and Culture at the Media Research Center. Dan, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
It's a pleasure to be back, and while we're talking about abortion, it's something that wasn't even on my list of things to talk about because we literally just posted this minutes ago on Newsbusters. But the comedian Sarah Silverman said something, really foul. It was the talking about the conscience cause law, and she said it makes me want to eat an aborted fetus.
Oh my gosh!
This is Hollywood. This is the people that we're fighting, and they're that bad. They're that extreme. You see them commenting on the pain law that just failed, and they talk about it like, oh, they're trying to ban abortions. Do they even look around the world and look at how much abortions are limited to 12 weeks or even less in many places? No. They always want America to emulate every other country except when it inconveniences them.
Well, you know, and talking about some of the other values that Hollywood goes after, Dan, Law and Order had a pretty disturbing episode this past week where they had an Ann Coulter type female commentator. And tell us the plot line they pursued in that issue of Law and Order SVU.
Well, what they do, they take a conservative, they misrepresent typical conservative positions, and so they have this blonde female pundit out there going to an event, and they're face down by Antifa, and she's brutally raped. And, of course, the plot line has the villain not being convicted, and this is what Hollywood does, drags conservative women through the mud and basically tells the world that, hey, rape conservative women, you won't even go to jail.
You know, and you indicated, too, you guys have been tracking a new horror movie that's come out that's called The First Purge. And according to your analysis, Dan, over there at Media Research Center, Newsbusters, it's like kind of builds on the Make America Great theme, but so it's designed to take a poke at Donald Trump, uses the MAGA idea, but turns the whole thing into a horror movie.
Yeah, this is, I've lost track, the third or maybe the fourth movie, The Purge. And the idea of these movies is that America becomes this insane place where one day a year you can commit any crime you want. There's no rules, no regulations, and so you just American just sort of vent its spleen and go commit murder and robbery and rape, etc. And there have been two movies or three movies like this. Like I said, I've lost track. They're kind of garbagey movies that try to leverage pop culture, what's going on in the country. Well, the latest one, the beginning of the commercial for the trailer for this movie is entirely a feel-good. It's got a voice that sounds like Sam Elliott's. It's nice. Oh, it shows pictures of a father and son fishing and parents sitting on the step and all these wholesome, folksy images about, and make America great. But to make America great again, we've got to embrace a new tradition. So it basically comes across like a Trump ad. And then, of course, the tradition you're supposed to embrace is the purge, the first purge. And that's, they even at the last image is the iconic red Make America Great Again hat. And, of course, it's got a purge message on it instead. I mean, couldn't that be more blatantly trying to attack Trump people than if they lined up a bunch of Trump people up against the wall? I mean, it's just...
So it's like they're creating the impression this is where Trumpism leads. It leads to these kind of violent scenes where people are just killing each other and purging each other because they regard them as evil and so forth. All right, well, Dan, let's talk for a minute. I want to get back to the release of this memo today and get your take on that from a kind of a standpoint of how the news is covering this thing. But give me your reaction briefly to the State of the Union address on Tuesday, a pretty remarkable event. I've read today that 63% of Democrats liked the speech, got universally favorable reviews. Even some media types actually liked it. But in general, what are you seeing as the reaction from the media, the mainstream media, and what do we learn from their reaction?
Well, I mean, I personally thought it was a very good speech. I think Trump tried to modulate his sort of public persona a little bit so he came across more statesmanlike. I thought he succeeded at that. The results were 75% of Americans liked the speech, including the initial study showed 43% of Democrats. That was the first that was out of the gate. And, 72% of independents and like 97% of Republicans all liked it. But the media didn't. So what they've done is every second up until the release of this memo, they spent the whole time trying to tell the American public why they're wrong. Why you're wrong about Donald Trump. How dare you like this speech? Oh, it was confrontational. It said the wrong things about immigrants. It said this. It attacked Black Lives Matter because, of course, it talked about not kneeling but standing for the national anthem. And it wasn't a negative speech, but the media want to pretend it was. Saying that a young boy heroically going around and putting flags on the graves of our real fallen heroes and saying that that's why we stand for the national anthem. That's why we stand for the national anthem. It is. We do it to honor those who are fallen. But the media, they have their own agenda, and that's what they've been pushing all week.
And it's interesting, too. I played some sound earlier this week, Dan, a film that was, or just some interviews that were done at New York University, NYU, done last week. I mean, like 7 days before the State of the Union speech was even given. And this is a guy going around campus asking these students what they thought about Donald Trump's State of the Union speech. I thought it was pretty racist. What did you think? That's how they kind of set him up. And they just went off on just how racist and inexcusable the speech was. It hadn't even been delivered. They hadn't heard it. And it struck me, Dan, they're so predictable that you would guess if they had interviewed these same students, they actually saw the speech, and you'd interviewed them after the speech, after they'd actually seen it, they would be saying the same things.
Well, it shows, frankly, how fraudulent so much of polling is. And I know I'm not supposed to say that. We're told every day, oh, you should believe the polling. And I just don't. I think so much of what I see in polling is spun. You see many major mistakes on polling. I mean, they got Trump wrong. It's not the first time. They got Brexit wrong. They got a lot of things wrong because they don't understand ordinary people, and they adjust the questions. And honestly, a lot of people answer the way they think the pollster wants, not the way they really want to answer.
Dan, I got a couple minutes left to talk about the reaction to this memo being released today. And I don't know if you had a chance to look through it or read through it. We talked about it quite a bit here in the first hour. But I read through that thing, and it struck me, Dan, that memo reveals that things are just as bad as we thought they were. And yet you look at the way the media has approached this. They've spent all week trying to douse expectations, trying to discredit this memo before it's even seen the light of day, trying to discredit the people that were behind it. Devin Nunes has been painted as virtually the demon incarnate over the course of this leading up to the release of the memo. So what was your take on how the media prepped the way for this memo to reveal, and how have they responded in the wake of this thing coming out?
Well, one of the things that really shocks me is the war on transparency. Back in January 2015, the Society of Professional Journalists got a whole bunch of groups together and sent a letter to the Obama administration criticizing their stance on transparency in government, calling for better relations with the press and more transparency. They sent a similar letter to Donald Trump last January, so just a little over a year ago, with 60 organizations signing on urging transparency. And then as soon as you get to a transparency moment in America where Donald Trump makes it clear he is going to release an important memo so everybody can see it, the American media lobby against it. Because you knew, one reason, it didn't leak, so you knew that Representative Schiff had not, it made Democrats bad because Schiff didn't leak it. You knew Democrats looked bad because Republicans voted for releasing it, Democrats voted against it. So we knew that part of the nature of the memo. But rather than argue for added transparency, they was like, oh, we can't take this seriously. This is political. Everything in Washington is political. Absolutely everything in Washington. Why won't they accept that? And then you got people on CNN, which has increasingly just become a joke of a network, saying, well, just because something comes from, it's tainted, doesn't mean you can't get good stuff from it. That's the whole concept of our legal system is when, something comes from the tainted fruit or poisoned fruit of a tree, it's all been tainted. You can't just get, Michael Wolff gave us this bogus claim about Nikki Haley having an affair with the president. But we should believe the rest of Michael Wolff's books? No.
Right.
I've watched Jay Tapper and Paul Farhi debate it and poke tons of holes in the book. Well, then why should I believe it in macro when I can't believe it in micro?
Yeah,
the same thing goes here.
Why should you believe virtually anything in it? So, all right, our guest has been Dan Gainor. He's the Vice President for Business and Culture at the Media Research Center organization. Media Research Center, newsbusters.org is the website where you can catch up on all the work that they do on that website multiple times every day, doing show prep. Couldn't do it without them. Dan, as always, thanks for taking some time out to chat with us. God bless you, my friend. I hope you have a really terrific weekend. We hope to talk to you next week.
Thanks, you too. Take care.
Dan Gainor, Media Research Center. We'll be right back with more content. Stay with us. Focal Point, American Family Radio.
If you like trips where you have to plan everything, then maybe our tour is not for you. Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman with American Family Association and American Family Radio. Of course, I'm talking about our spiritual heritage tours of Washington, D.C., Mount Vernon, and then a separate trip to Williamsburg, Virginia. And guess what? We take care of everything. All you have to do is, as they say, show up. But we take these spiritual heritage tours twice a year, once in June and once in September. Stephen McDowell of the Providence Foundation, who is a historian, will be joining us for both tours, and he will tell you everything you need to know about the places, the times, the events that we will experience on these tours of Washington, D.C. and Williamsburg. For all the information, just go to the website spiritualheritagetours.com. That's spiritualheritagetours.com for everything.
Here on American Family Radio, this is David Wolin with Haven Ministries, inviting you to anchor your day in God's Word. They call it seasonal affective disorder, or SAD for short, and that about sums it up. It's a deep depression that settles in during the long, cloudy months of winter. But those affected by it only need one thing to cure their depression: light. It's a lot like what happens when a person encounters the one who proclaimed himself to be the light of the world. But Jesus came to cure us from more than depression. He came to bring us out of darkness and into his eternal kingdom. In John 8, verse 12, Jesus declares, "Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Get the print edition of Anchor Devotional delivered to your home in print each month. Visit getanchor.com.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Video segments of today's program will be posted at afr.net and on the Focal Point Facebook page. You'll also find the best collection of Brian's resources on our Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, be among the very first every morning to find out what the day's show will be about. Just follow Brian at Brian J. Fisher.
Brian J. Fisher.
Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio, free-for-all edition of Focal Point on American Family Radio Talk Network. We will make it free-for-all Friday. In the last segment of the day, talk about anything you want to talk about. You got some comments on the memo. That thing is still burning hot in D.C. The media is going to give it a lot of attention for the rest of the day. You're welcome to chat about that if you would like to do that. I got some more content that I want to deliver to you. Trump, by the way, is up to 49% approval rating after the State of the Union speech. So that was a blockbuster. So he's up to 49%. That's the highest rating he's had in about 7 months. Here is Media Research Center Brent Bozell slamming the coverage, the media coverage of the release of the congressional memo today. And the folks there at Newsbusters, that's where Dan Gainor is, and his boss is Brent Bozell. They looked at the news coverage between January 29 and February 1, and they discovered that the media, network news, devoted 3.5 more coverage to worries over the memo's release rather than the alleged FBI misconduct that's contained in the documents. In other words, they were wringing their hands over whether this was a memo that ought to be released, whether this is information or content that the American public ought to be trusted with, rather than being concerned about what it describes and portrays about the FBI. So again, sometimes the media bias is just found in the amount of respective emphasis they give to an issue. Let us drop down to Donald Trump, clip number 2. This is Donald Trump at the GOP retreat, and he kind of fingers an issue with the left in general, and this is particularly true with the media. And he makes a pretty incisive observation that I think is true in general about the left, and it's true in particular of the media. Clip number 2.
We've created 2.4 million jobs. That's unthinkable. And that doesn't include all of the things that are happening. You're going to see numbers that get even better. The stock market has added more than $8 trillion in new wealth. Unemployment claims are at a 45-year low, which is something. After years of wage stagnation, we are finally seeing rising wages. African American and Hispanic unemployment have both reached the lowest levels ever recorded. That's something very, very special. And when I made that statement the other night, there was zero movement from the Democrats. They sat there, stone cold, no smile, no applause. You would have thought that on that one they would have sort of at least clapped a little bit, which tells you perhaps they'd rather see us not do well than see our country do great. And that's not good. That's not good.
And I think that's an insightful observation, that the left, this includes the media as well as people on the political left, that a lot of them, I'm not saying it's true for all of them, but a lot of them would rather see America fail than to see Republicans succeed. I mean, these things that Donald Trump was talking about, regardless of what party you belong to, you should be happy for your fellow Americans that these things are happening, that jobs are being created, that new wealth is being generated, that unemployment claims are at a 45-year low, that unemployment in the black community is lower than it's ever been. That is something to celebrate, but the media can't do it because they're so uptight that they would have to give Republicans some credit for what's taking place. Now, here is Michelle Obama, a bright ray of sunshine in the gloom. Clip number 1.
People are afraid, but then there are people who feel good about the direction of the country. That's what makes this country complicated, because it's made up of so many different people from different backgrounds. We are this mosh pit of society, and sometimes there's a rub. But the thing that we have to remember, the thing I learned in the 8 years that I was in the White House, was that what we do every day in our lives, the good things that we do every day, and we know we do it, we show empathy, we care for each other, we do have a lot in common. That's what it means to lead with hope and not fear. And that's all we have is hope.
That was a great statement until that very last statement. That's all we have is hope. So I don't know why she tacked that on, because you parse that, all we have is hope. It's like things are so dismal, things are so bad, could be an allusion to the Trump administration, to what America is going to become under Donald Trump, that all we have left is hope. If she just left that off, it would have been a pretty good statement. Now let's look at a couple of politicians, what they were saying before this memo was released. Clip number 3, this is Jim Hines. He's a Democrat from Connecticut rather. He's on with Anderson Cooper 360, and here's what he had. This is last night. Here's what he had to say, thinking ahead to the release of the memo.
when Devin Nunes made his midnight run to the White House alleging that there had been spying on Trump Tower, and then we get the allegations that Susan Rice and Sam Powers were unmasking improperly. Both of those things exist only to throw dust, sand in the gears of this investigation and to create doubt in the American population that the FBI and specifically the Mueller investigation are happening in an unbiased way. They are happening in an unbiased way. There is zero proof or even evidence that there is political bias in the FBI, but if you say it long enough and often enough, there will be people who have doubts about it, and it's a profoundly unpatriotic thing to do.
Well, good thing he tried to say that yesterday, because he couldn't say it today. There's zero proof or evidence that there is political bias in the FBI, and that's what that memo revealed, is the level of bias. I mean, you have this Christopher Steele saying he was desperate to see Donald Trump not elected, that it was critical. We have the Lisa Page, Peter Strzok texts. Donald Trump is loathsome. We need an insurance policy because we cannot take a chance that Donald Trump will win. This is supposed to be from the FBI, supposed to be unbiased and just about the truth and justice and the American way. Now, here is Representative Castro talking about the Devin Nunes. Here's what he had to say.
I said in that hearing that we had that I would prefer that neither memo be released, the Republican or the Democratic memo, because nobody's going to be able to see the source material and make an independent judgment for themselves. The memo itself is basically a political document. Right. It's a partisan document. And for whatever reason, Devin Nunes has decided to make his career a sacrifice fly for Donald Trump. That's exactly what he's doing, and for the White House. And, you know, I think when the memo comes out, I think you will have folks on Fox News and Breitbart and others who will make the kind of deal about it that Donald Trump would like to see. That's why we wanted to make sure that both memos were going to be released at the same time, if either of them was going to be released.
You know, and I think the Republicans I've heard from this morning, and I know I speak for myself when I say I wish they had revealed their memo. I don't know why they didn't. You know, the Republicans found a way to get their memo released. There's no reason why the Democrats couldn't have done the same thing. I think the problem is they just really did not have any convincing response to what was in this. I mean, it's the FBI files that have Christopher Steele saying that he's desperate to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. How do you whitewash that? You know, it's the FBI files that indicate that they did not communicate to the FISA court a lot of the information that they had. There's information they concealed from the FISA court. Christopher Steele's bias, for instance, they concealed from the FISA court that Bruce Orr and his wife Lisa were working on this. It was propaganda material paid for by Hillary and the Democratic Committee. I don't know how you whitewash that. So I think here's a reason why the House memo did not see the light of day. Now let's go to Tucker Carlson, clip number 6. He's talking here with Joe DiGenova. He's a former federal prosecutor, and they're talking here. Joe DiGenova is talking about Christopher Wray, the current FBI director, and Rod Rosenstein. Here's what he had to say as a former federal prosecutor.
This is the arrogance of Wray and Rosenstein. They want to protect the bureaucracy. They want to protect the bureaucracy because they think the institutions are more important than you or I knowing anything, and they think the country cannot survive without them. This is this phony notion that DOJ and the FBI are independent of the executive branch and the President of the United States. It is an insidious concept. They work for the President. He can fire them. He can tell them what to do. That doesn't mean he's going to interfere in an investigation. But the arrogance of Wray and Rosenstein to think that they can defy congressional oversight and ask the Speaker to take out the names of people that have broken the law. Well, how outrageous.
And what he's talking about there is the fact that Christopher Wray and Rod Rosenstein led an effort to try to get every name redacted from the memo. Now, they weren't successful, but that's what they were trying to do. You know, and DiGenova's point is, look, this is a matter of getting at the truth here. We need to know who the people were. We need to know what people have did. We need to identify the people and what they have done and why that's a matter of concern. Now, here is clip number 7. This is the second of 2 exchanges between Tucker and Carlson and Joe DiGenova that we have for you. Talking here about Joan Walsh, who went on CNN and suggested that if you even ask questions about this, it's unpatriotic.
So when Joan Walsh on CNN suggests that you're unpatriotic for asking questions about what your government is doing, you don't feel unpatriotic, is what you're saying?
No, actually, it's not a question of patriotism. As an old U.S. attorney, I don't like dirty cops. And the 7th floor of the FBI is full of them, and the upper echelon of the DOJ under Obama was full of dirty cops. And look what they did. They threw a case against Hillary Clinton like a bunch of lousy 1930s prize fighters for $500, and they tried to frame Donald Trump with a created crime.
Seems like our patriotic duty would be to untangle the mess, find out what happened.
Let's find out what happened. Let's unseal the memo.
And so that would be the patriotic thing to do. If you care about your country, you want your FBI to be above reproach. And that's what we're concerned about. I mean, we have a Republican who's the head of the FBI, Jeff Sessions. We still want to see whatever the FBI is up to, we want to see that come to light so it can be dealt with, so that even under a Republican administration, the deficiencies and the flaws of the FBI can be exposed and can be corrected. You're listening to Focal Point on the American Family Radio Network. We'll take your calls when we come back. It's Free for All Friday. Talk about anything that's been in the news. When we come back, 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840.
This is Tim Armstrong from the Worthy Walk radio program. I encourage you to listen as we work verse by verse through the scriptures each Sunday at 9:30 a.m. Central Time here on American Family Radio. Join me as we explore the Word of God and learn to apply its truths to our lives each day. The Worthy Walk radio program, Sundays at 9:30 a.m. Central Time on American Family Radio.
Hi, this is David Barton of Wall Builders Live, inviting you to join me here on American Family Radio this weekend. We take the ideas of the Founding Fathers and apply those ideas to the major issues of the day. Our guests include those who are in the headlines as well as experts on issues facing this great nation. Along the way, you'll discover the role that faith has played in our nation's history as well as in dealing with the issues we face right now. Join us Saturday afternoon at 2 Central here on American Family Radio.
Looking for a great vacation for you and your family spring break? Well, so are we. And I think we've got the place for you. Southeast Houston suffered unbelievable damage because of Hurricane Harvey. Hundreds of thousands of families have had their homes gutted because of the flooding they endured last year in September. Now you and I get a chance to be the hands and feet of Jesus. March 10th to March 24th, 8 Days of Hope is going to do its first ever back-to-back trip. 8 Days of Hope, 14 and 15. It's free. All you have to do is get to Houston. We provide the food and lodging. We're looking for skilled professionals, people who know how to work with their hands, and maybe they do this for a living. We're also looking for people that are less skilled, but are still looking to be a part of something way bigger than just themselves. You don't have to come for all 2 weeks. You can come for as little as 3 days. Go to 8daysofhope.com for more information, 8daysofhope.com. Come be a part of something huge. 8 Days of Hope, 14 and 15. Be the hands and feet of Jesus in Southeast Houston. 8daysofhope.com.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Focal Point. Brian Fisher.
Welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Number to call if you want to join the conversation, talk about anything that's on your mind, 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. Let's grab a couple of quick sound bites. This is clip 8. Joy Reid, who's on MSNBC, and she reveals something here. She doesn't even realize what she's doing, but she reveals something, confesses something, admits something pretty embarrassing about her own network and her own program, clip 8.
And then he gives a speech tonight in which he makes it sound like the biggest issue in the United States, the biggest threat is MS-13, a gang nobody that doesn't watch Fox News has ever heard of. So he makes it sound like they're the biggest threat.
Why does he do it? All right, so what is Joy Reid admitting here? She says, look, unless you watch Fox News, you never would have even heard of MS-13. So she's admitting that they are a low information network, that I do not give my viewers information. They're low-information viewers. They never heard of MS-13, and the reason they never heard on it because they depend upon me to be the source of their information and their news. Now, clip 9 is the response of one of the victims of MS-13. This is Mrs. Alvarado. Her daughter was one of the two that Donald Trump referred to that were brutally assaulted by MS-13 and beaten to death. And so she's asked to respond to what Joy Reid says, that nobody cares about MS-13. They're not the biggest threat in America. Trump's exaggerating, all that kind of stuff. Here's how she responded to that.
I have no words. I mean, these are gang members that just, you know, decided to be a judge and a jury to take my daughter out like that. It's unacceptable. I don't want it to happen to anybody else's family, but something needs to be done. And I won't stop doing what I'm doing until everything turns out right. I can only hope and pray that whoever's listening or any gang members, please stop the violence. It's enough. How much more blood do we have to shed?
So her response to Joy Reid, nobody that doesn't watch Fox has ever heard of or cares about MS-13. And she says, well, I have no words. I mean, I'm a parent. I lost a daughter to MS-13. I certainly care about MS-13. All right, let's go to the phones, 888-589-8840. Let's begin by starting with Jay in Houston, Texas. Jay, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hi, Brian.
Hey.
Just wanted to comment on the memo that's finally been released and the deep state and them fighting back their way. And the train crash. The GOPers headed to a retreat, and a garbage truck just happened to be parked on the railroad tracks right after the State of the Union speech. You got Democratic hacks. You've got disinformation. You know that because they're going to try first, and if that doesn't work, they're going to go with false flags. I mean, look at the Super Bowl Sunday night, and let's hope nothing happens. But it's in a rich environment of they refer to it as Little Mogadishu up there, Minneapolis, or where they were going to play the Super Bowl at. I mean, there's some things that can happen, but they're going to fight back their way.
Now, Jay, let me ask you a question. Are you suggesting that the Democrats arranged for that truck to be in the path of the train? There's something deliberate about that. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, the powers that be against Donald Trump is what I'm suggesting.
All right.
And they had it happen. They arranged it their way. The ones that the powers against Donald Trump for it to occur, and there's going to be more occurrences. So just be on the lookout.
Yeah. All right, Jay. Well, that's a pretty extreme accusation to make without any. I mean, I'm not saying it's not possible for that to happen. It certainly is. Virtually nothing is impossible anymore. But do you have any evidence to back that up, or is it just more kind of an educated suspicion on your part?
Well, I'll put it to you this way: follow QAnon, follow Anonymous, and Mark Taylor, the former firefighter, and he had a vision of Donald Trump becoming president in 2011. God showed him that. Those would be three good sources just to keep an eye on. And
okay, Jay.
Let's just hope this thing plays out for the best. I think it will, but we'll have to go through the worst of it before we can get to the daylight.
Yeah. Okay, Jay. Thank you for the call. I appreciate that. Let us go to Tip in Jonesboro, Tennessee. Tip, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Good afternoon.
Hey.
I know you can't predict indictments, and it seemed that you were saying that you're happy just to get rid of these people. But it seems to me, I looked up Chuck Colson, and what he was indicted and went to prison for was obstruction of justice.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that a lot of this has been obstruction of justice, and if there's no consequences for that, then it could just continue on.
Yeah.
There would need to be an apology to the Colson family. if there's no justice done with some of these people.
Mm-hmm. And are you thinking of anybody in particular, Tip, that strikes you as somebody that's been engaged in what looks like obstruction of justice, and there needs to be some kind of discipline brought to bear?
Well, I would think Comey, number
Mm-hmm.
one. And, I mean, Hillary, outside of this, you know, if they put money in on making that dossier, then there's an issue there, too.
Yeah. Well, you know, and you have a situation, too, where it's not really obstruction of justice, but it's sort of an effort to create injustice by getting the Trump campaign team in trouble with no evidence, with false information, with false accusations, with made-up stuff in this Steele dossier, and to know that the information is false, and yet still go into one of the top secret courts of law in the land and then lie to these judges and try to use this phony dossier to get somebody in legal trouble. I mean, people are going to jail. Carter Page is going to go to jail over that. You know, Paul Manafort is going to go to jail over that. So they want to put people behind bars based on this fallacious surveillance. So that's not exactly obstruction of justice. If anything, it would be worse. All right, Tip, I appreciate the call. Let's grab a call from Herbert in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Herbert, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
All right, thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
I was just regarding the conversation that Putin had with Obama, and Obama seemed to be promising him things, and then the Democrats didn't want any type of safeguards during the election. They claimed that vote ID was racist and that we shouldn't have that, and they didn't seem to want any type of safeguards. And I think that they had, they had planned for Hillary to win, but by divine intervention, they were so shocked at all that underhandedness that she lost. And I think that's why they're so upset. And that's just my comment.
Yeah. Well, and, I think one of the other things that happened, Herbert, is I think when Hillary lost, I think they just freaked because the stuff that's coming out in this memo, this is stuff that they thought was going to be buried forever because they were convinced that Hillary was going to win. And none of this stuff, none of the deception, none of the lies that they told at the FISA court, none of the material that they omitted from their FISA application, they omitted the fact that the information about Christopher Steele being so biased, admitted the fact that Bruce Orr's wife was doing opposition research and feeding it to the FBI. They thought none of that was going to come to light. They were safe, they were spared. And then when Trump lost, I think they started to quake in their boots because they were afraid that exactly what is happening today was going to happen, and they haven't been able to stop it despite their best efforts. All right, let's go to Ricky in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Ricky, welcome. What's on your mind?
Yes, remember, Brian, everything that the Democrats accuse of the right, they're always guilty of themselves. The reason why they're accusing Trump of collusion is because I've got indisputable evidence or fact that Putin did want somebody to win the election, but it wasn't Trump, it was Hillary, because she gave him 20% of our uranium. And remember, the main thing about the Russians, they want to destroy America, and they need the atomic bomb and uranium to do that. And if I divulge my evidence, then everybody that has anything on Hillary or Bill always ends up dead. So the best we can hope for, because I'm not going to divulge my source, is that Putin, God moves in his heart to publicly apologize to Trump, saying, I'm sorry, I did try to get Hillary to win the election against you. And when that happens, if it ever does happen, the Democratic Party will be exposed completely, 100%, because they'll be in shock. They won't be able to refute. Now, if one of his agents leaks that, they'll be executed. So it's going to have to come from Putin himself. But he did collude in the Democratic Party to beat Trump because he wanted Hillary to win the election, not Trump. And I've got concrete evidence for that.
Well, Ricky, I got another call I want to wedge in, so I need to let you go. But you make a good point. It never struck me as very plausible that Donald Trump would want to help Trump win. seems to me that if he was going to help anybody, it would be Hillary because of the uranium thing. Donald Trump was unpredictable. Hillary Clinton was a pushover. He knew that. Anyway, let's go to Tom in Alabama. Tom, last call of the day. Got about 30 seconds. Hit me with your best shot.
Just wanted to say that I am glad to see that we finally have people in Congress that are willing to put their careers on line to get out the truth with this memo.
Yeah.
You know, it shows exactly what has been happening in government for the past 50, 60 years.
Yeah, and you look at the beating that Nunes has had to take in getting this out. It takes courage to do that. Well, that's it for this week. Bow low before God, stand tall before man, stand in the gap, and never forget, with God's help, we are fighting a winnable war. See you on Monday.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
We desperately need a spiritual awakening.
Situations have deteriorated to the point where the only thing that will save us is for God to step in revival.
Revive Us Again is a powerful new